So yesterday we were talking about mindfulness in a very basic way. If we get down to the essence of what mindfulness is, it is memory. Literally, that's what it means. And it's the act of remembering the present rather than the past. And as you go through the day meditating and you begin to become sensitive to what the mind is doing, it's obvious that a lot of the time it's forgetting. And maybe it's forgetting most of the time. So we have this idea that meditation involves being perfectly aware and clear all day long. And if we have that idea, we quickly become very disillusioned. Because usually it doesn't work that way. This is why I said if you want to be successful in your meditation career, you must have the capacity to live with failure. Failure is very important. We learn from our failures. So we learn that staying present is very, very difficult. We keep being pulled away, usually by the mind that wants to think about something much more important than what we are doing now. Often the mind will head to the future or to the past because the mind has that capacity. It can create a future, it can create a past. Or the mind might be busy with what's happening in the present, but it's creating a story about the present rather than being completely intimate with the present. So this morning when we were doing the elements, what's the difference between, of course I've got 5 fingers on my left hand, and the actual experience of the fingers? It's a big difference. Even in terms of present experience, we have my story about present experience versus the actual experience when I look at it very closely. When we do this practice, what we're trying to do is to get closer and closer and closer to what is really going on. And one of the major barriers that we have is that we keep forgetting. We forget what we are doing. We forget what is happening. And when we forget, the mind will rush in and create something. And that something pulls us away, some kind of dream, some kind of fantasy. But in that forgetting, the experience is very weak. It does have a dream-like quality. Let's say we're packing for coming to a retreat. And we're looking around the house, I've got to take this, I've got to take this, I've got to take this, I've got to take this. We arrive at the retreat centre, we unpack and we realise I've forgotten something. It was right on the desk, it was right in front of my eyes. I saw it, I thought, yes, I must take this, but I forgot it. Is this a familiar experience? Now, in that moment that I was with that object, let's say it's a clock, and I forgot to bring my little clock. At the moment that I saw it, that was a clear moment of awareness, and the thought that came up, I must remember to pack that clock, was very clear. Then the mind moves to the next moment and the next experience, and that previous moment is immediately forgotten. It's just vanished. If when you go to the beach, you make footsteps in the sand, the water goes over and the footsteps are gone. This is our normal state of mind when mindfulness is weak. So there's awareness, we are engaging with the world, but it's like nothing leaves an imprint. Something comes, but then it's gone. It's forgotten. It's vanished. We don't even know what it was. And in this kind of situation, it's very difficult to learn from experience, because as soon as we experience something, we forget it. So mindfulness is memory. It's training the memory. The memory of the present rather than the past. What mindfulness does is it makes experience more alive, stronger, clearer, and it also gives it a solidity that enables us to learn from it. The practice of mindfulness, the Buddha found to be central, as we discussed. He associated the arising of mindfulness with wisdom. He associated the loss of mindfulness, the forgetting of mindfulness, with delusion. So there's a very clear connection. One of the main areas in the early teachings where the Buddha talks about the practice of mindfulness is in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, which appears twice in the Nikayas. And what I want to do tonight, and we may continue tomorrow night, depending on how we go, is start at the beginning of this sutta and start to go through it and unpack some of the basic principles that the Buddha is talking about. So he begins, "This is how I heard it. Once the Blessed One was living among the Kurus, near the market town of Kammasadhamma. The Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus. Bhikkhus, Bhante, they replied. The Blessed One said, this way, the four domains of mindfulness, has a single direction: the purification of beings, the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, the destruction of pain and grief, the attainment of the right path, and the realization of Nibbana." It begins, "This is how I heard it, evaṁ me suttam." This reminds us that these teachings come from an oral tradition. There's debates whether writing existed at the Buddha's time, but I think it's generally accepted that there was, but it was only used for unimportant things like business, commerce. But for serious matters like Dharma, everything was oral, which meant everything was memorized. And this creates a real difference between the Buddha and his society and ours. So we've been talking about memory and forgetting. Any educated person in the Buddha's time had a trained memory, because that's how they learned. If you went to school, there were no textbooks. You learned by reciting. The teacher would sit up in front and recite something, chant something, sing a passage, and you would sing it back. And you would sing back and forth, and then move on. So if you were educated in a formal way, you developed a phenomenal memory by our standards, incredible memory. Even ordinary, like craftsmen, would have very good memories, because again, they had no books. Whatever they learned was all up here. So people in general had very good memories. In Australia, you still find remnants of that oral culture among some indigenous people, the Aboriginal people. I remember listening to an interview once with a man who was researching massacres. Europeans conducted many massacres of the indigenous people, and often the Europeans kept no record of the massacres because they were ashamed. This man was doing oral history. He was going to Aboriginal elders, asking them about the tribal memory. What do you remember of these events? And he was talking about the difficulties that he was having because they were reluctant to speak to an outsider. He said one day he was talking to one of the elders, and suddenly the elder started telling him the story that he was looking for. And he tells him the whole thing. And the researcher was delighted, but he felt frustrated because he hadn't expected anything that day, and so he had not brought his recorder. So he came back the next day and he sat down with the elder and he pulled out the recorder and he said, "Could you tell me all this again?" And the elder looked at him very suspiciously and said, "But I told you yesterday." And the researcher says, "Yes, but I didn't have my recorder with me, but now I've got my recorder, so could you tell me?" And the elder said, "But I told you yesterday." Yes, I know, but I've got the recorder. And the elder just said, "But I told you yesterday." And in his world, if you say something and you hear it, that's it. You're expected to remember. Why would you repeat yourself? What is this person doing? It's already been said. Surely he remembers. He has to remember. It's just, they just assume that. There's research done in Rajasthan, in northern India. There's a particular caste of people, and the men in that caste, their job is to recite the Indian epics. You have the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and each region has its own versions in oral tradition, and they just go on forever. And so you have this group of people who are specialised in the singing of these epics. And in order to sing them, they have to have incredible memories. But the tradition is dying out. Now, partly it's dying out because the young boys aren't going through the training because they prefer to go to university and study IT. But partly it's declining because even if a young boy sits at his father's feet and goes through the traditional training, if he has gone to school and if he has learned to read and write, his memory capacity significantly falls, significantly drops away. It's quite interesting. Writing and reading destroys memory. And the Buddha comes from a time before this has happened, and so if you read the suttas, you're reading something which was never meant to be read. It was meant to be chanted in choir, and it was meant to be memorized. And this is why reading the suttas is quite difficult. They can be quite boring and, of course, very formulaic, very repetitious. Because they come out of this oral culture, they're meant to be sung. Every discourse begins, "Evang me sutpang," this is how I heard it. Somebody heard this, and now they're speaking it. So it's being transmitted. And the original I here is Venerable Ananda. Once the Blessed One was living among the Kurus near the market town of Kammasadhamma. This is in the northwest Ganges Valley. This is in the area around modern Delhi. Most of the Buddha's teaching took place further southeast. He roamed in the Ganges Valley between roughly to the east, the border between present-day Bihar and West Bengal, and then moving up the Ganges Valley to this area south of Delhi, and that was the area that he wandered in and the area that he taught in. He addresses the bhikkhus. Now, bhikkhu, of course, means fully ordained monk. The monks and the nuns live according to Vinaya. This is the monastic discipline. And the original teachings are classified into Vinaya and Sutta. The Sutta are the discourses, Vinaya are the rules, and the stories around the rules. A word can have a different meaning depending on whether it's in Vinaya or whether it's in Sutta. So the word bhikkhu in Vinaya means a fully ordained monk. In Sutta meaning, it means any committed practitioner, male or female, ordained or lay. So this is very important because it's easy to get the idea that this is a teaching that isn't meant for us. It's only meant for the monks and the nuns. But this is not true. It never was true. One of the things that comes out of the suttas is there were a lot of lay people who practiced Satipaṭṭhāna and who attained stages of awakening through the practice of Satipaṭṭhāna. There was a flourishing lay practice tradition at the time of the Buddha. And a lot of the time they're recorded as practicing Satipaṭṭhāna. So this teaching and this discourse is for us. The Buddha then says, this is the one direction way. The four domains of mindfulness, or the four establishments of mindfulness, Cattaro Satipaṭṭhāna, is the one direction way. We'll look at this phrase first, the Ekayano Maggo. Literally, it'll be the one going way, or one going path. This is an unusual term in the discourses. In the medieval commentaries, Buddhaghosa puts a whole little commentary on the meaning of this phrase, and he gives a list of ways of interpreting this phrase, and the last one in the list is the only way. And in the Old English translations, this is what you get. You would have the four domains of mindfulness are the only way for boom, 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 giving a very exclusive, dogmatic feel to the teaching. But this is not what is meant. That is clearly incorrect. This expression, Ekayano Maggo, is unusual in the early teachings, but it does appear, and in one discourse it shows its meaning very nicely. There's a section in Mahasihanada Sutta on the 5 destinations and Nibbana. Now the 5 destinations are, well, the first one is hell, and then you move up to the pretas, the spirits, and then you move up to the animal realm, human realm, deva realm, and finally you have Nibbana. And in samsara we wander about through these destinations, and hopefully we get to Nibbana, which is the culmination. And the Buddha illustrates this using 5 images, and this is the first one, where the destination is hell. Suppose there were a charcoal pit deeper than a man's height, full of glowing coals without flame or smoke, and then a man, scorched and exhausted by hot weather, weary, parched and thirsty, came by a path going in one way only, and directed to that same charcoal pit. You have this image of, here's a destination. In this case, it's not a very good one. It's a very bad one. And someone comes along, scorched and exhausted by hot weather, weary, parched and thirsty. So the weather's been a bit warm, and we can get a feel for this image. Of course, northern India, in summer, very hot. The Buddha often uses the image of heat to indicate drivenness. You've all heard the word craving, which is at the centre of our problem. Craving is the translation of tanha, which literally means thirst. So the image here is where in a hot day, the sun is beating down, we're very thirsty. Now in that situation, we are driven, we are impelled, we are pushed, we have to do something, we have to get something. So this is craving, and this is the normal human experience. We are driven, we are pushed, we are pulled, we feel that we have to get something. And this motivates most of what we do in our lives. This is something that the people in the marketing and advertising industries know very well. This is what fuels consumerism. In our current society, economic growth is the absolute priority. Every government is committed to growing the economy. That's the first duty. It's inconceivable that, say, government leaders would appear on television and say to their people, we've been growing the economy now for the past 20, 40, 50, 100 years, and now we have enough and we can stop. And we can do something completely different. It would not happen. It could not happen. If any politician said that, they'd be voted out of office immediately, if not put into prison. Because, in fact, we cannot have enough. It's just impossible. Craving can never be satisfied. It's just in the nature of it. So this drives us, this sense of being driven. And here the Buddha conveys this sense of drivenness by the image of a man who is scorched and exhausted by hot weather, weary, parched and thirsty. So this is someone who's motivated, who's looking for something. And what does he come to? He comes to a path going in one way only. And this is ekkayano maggo, the same expression that the Buddha uses for Satipaṭṭhāna. It's a one-way path, a one-direction path. If I get onto this path, and if I keep going, it is inevitable that I will reach this destination. So this is a path that goes one way. There are no branches. There's no corners anywhere. It doesn't go off anywhere else. It just goes one direction. In this case, the direction is towards hell, and it may be towards the human realm, it may be towards the Deva realm, or it may be towards Nibbana. And in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, the Buddha is saying there is such a path that leads to Nibbana. There's a path that has one direction, it goes straight there. There are no deviations, there's no branches going off, it just goes straight to Nibbana. And this path is Satipaṭṭhāna. And it's the only practice that gets that description. So this is very important. Satipaṭṭhāna is very important because this is the path which, if we follow it, it will take us to Nibbana. It may take a while. It may take a few lifetimes. But we will get there. You can't get much more important than that. This way, this one direction way, are the Cattaro Satipaṭṭhāna. And let's have a look at the meaning of Satipaṭṭhāna. It's a compound word. It's made up of two parts, actually three parts. Sati, which is mindfulness, and the second part of the compound is both Paṭṭhāna and Upaṭṭhāna. When you bring two words together in Pali and make one word, if the first word ends in a vowel and the second word begins with a vowel, then you can simply drop one of them. So Sati Upaṭṭhāna becomes Satipaṭṭhāna. If it begins with a consonant, it just stays the same. So Satipaṭṭhāna becomes Satipaṭṭhāna. This is an ambiguity which, of course, we don't get in English, so we miss out. But anybody who would speak Pali would recognise this. So Satipaṭṭhāna, the word, has a double-barrelled meaning. First of all, you have Sati, mindfulness, Paṭṭhāna, Upaṭṭhāna. Now, both of these are based on the root ta, the Pali root ta, which is the Sanskrit root star. And in English, there are a number of words based on this root. Station, stand, stationary, and so on. Words based on this root star indicate a place where one is grounded, where one is at home, where one stays, where one remains, a place where you find certain things. So a bus station, a train station. Where do you find the bus? You find it in the bus station. This is where the buses are at home. This is where they are grounded. This is where they belong. This is the meaning that you find in these terms, and it's the same with Paṭṭhāna. If something is Paṭṭhāna, it's stationed, it's grounded, it's here, it's at home. And then you have Upaṭṭhāna or Paṭṭhāna. Upaṭṭhāna is the action, it's the activity of stationing, of grounding oneself, of establishing oneself. The Sati Upaṭṭhāna are the establishments or the applications of mindfulness. And what they're getting at here is This is the doing of mindfulness, the being mindful. And the Satipaṭṭhāna is where the mindfulness is stationed. This is where I put my mindfulness. So it's where it takes place. And the four Satipaṭṭhānas are the body, feeling, the citta, heart, mind, and the fourth is phenomena. We've been talking about body. Body is the first paṭṭhāna. It's the first place where we put our mindfulness. Where do we place our mindfulness? We place it here, in the body. And also it's the upaṭhāna, the activity of being mindful. What am I mindful of? I'm mindful of the body. I practice this contemplating of the body. So Satipaṭṭhāna has this double meaning. It's what I am mindful of, and it's the activity of being mindful. These days you find it translated often as something like, Bhikkhu Bodhi now translates it as the establishments of mindfulness. This is the activity of being mindful. Alan Wallace translates it as the close applications of mindfulness. Satipaṭṭhāna is the activity of being mindful, and it's in particular being mindful of the body, of feeling, of citta, heart, mind, and phenomena. Now these four we'll talk about in more detail, but essentially they mean all human experience. First of all, body. Body in the broad sense. All physical experience. Everything that I see, everything that I hear, everything that I smell, everything that I taste, everything that I touch is body. The contemplation of body includes seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. All physical experience. Citta, heart, mind, is all non-physical experience. Everything that I think, every thought, every emotion, every image, every idea, every concept, every perception, everything that takes place in the mind. What this is saying is that Satipaṭṭhāna covers every human experience. And again, this is very important. Now, what we're talking about is a form of meditation practice, but a form of meditation practice which is not defined by one particular kind of object. Some people here have done anapanasati. Anapanasati. Sati is mindfulness, anapana, of in and out breathing. So here you have a mindfulness practice which is defined by its object, breathing. Now if I was doing anapanasati and I was seeing something and focusing on seeing, I would not be doing anapanasati because it's not the breathing. If I was caught up in thought, I would not be doing anapanasati because it is not the breathing. But in the Satipaṭṭhāna, everything is the object. Everything. The Buddha is saying it's not that this is the experience that I have for my meditation and that is something else. He's saying everything is Satipaṭṭhāna. We've been talking about being mindful in everyday activity, remembering I am already aware. If I'm going about my ordinary activities, I remember, oh, I'm walking, oh, I'm looking, oh, I'm thinking, I'm wanting, I'm disliking, I'm wet, I'm dry, I feel agitated, I feel calm. All of this is part of Satipaṭṭhāna. All of this is part of the practice. Now when we teach a meditation method, we give priority to certain kinds of things. Come into the hall, sit down, follow the breathing. So we think breathing is very important. It's not really all that important. It's convenient. If we want to develop samadhi, concentration, then it really helps to have the body still, and it really helps to have a meditation object like the breathing. It's convenient. And in the walking, we do the slow, formal walking, lifting, pushing, placing, touching. But again, we do that because it's convenient. It's a good way to develop samadhi while walking. We can't sit all day, so we'll do this. But this doesn't mean that Satipaṭṭhāna is only the sitting and the walking. It's not confined to that. Satipaṭṭhāna includes everything. So it's not that I come in here, sit down, meditate, get up, leave, and then the meditation is finished and I can take a break. The meditation continues. It's a very different form. If I'm walking down the stairs going to lunch, I'm not interested in developing a strong samadhi. If I was in the lunch queue and I was interested in developing a strong samadhi, I would drive everybody completely insane. Can you imagine being behind, going to lunch, and you're behind someone who is walking really, really, really slowly down those stairs, and they get the plate and they lift it very, very slowly, and they move, reach in. It would drive you completely mad. Not to mention the kitchen aunties. Now, you would do that if you wanted to cultivate samadhi. And in some meditation centres, they actually like that. That would be admired. I sometimes practiced and taught in a little meditation centre in Blue Mountains outside of Sydney. And it's just a suburban block that's been turned into a meditation centre. And at the top is the house, and down a little path is the meditation hall. It's not far from the hall to the house. But one retreat, one of the students was so slow in all of her movements that she took an hour to get from the hall to the dining room, and another hour to get back. I don't know how long she spent eating. But the staff were fine. They thought, this is great. And so they just waited for her. And she had very good samadhi. It was great. So the very slow movements are designed to go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into samadhi. Very effective. But it's not the only way to practice Satipaṭṭhāna. You can practice Satipaṭṭhāna at normal speed. You can practice it at fast speed. It includes everything. And of course the disadvantage of the very slow, concentrated approach is you can only do it in a special environment. When you go back home, you can't possibly do it. So if we want a form of practice which we can take with us when we leave, we need to learn how to practice at normal speed, doing normal things. And this is an important part of Satipaṭṭhāna. What we do in the hall is very important. The hall is where we develop samadhi, concentration. And that gives us depth. It's like if you go to a swimming pool and you stand at the edge of the pool and dive in, under the water. So you go in but this far. If you get on a diving board and dive in, you go that far. If you get on the high board and dive in, you go really, really deep. The samadhi is all about depth. The more samadhi we have, the deeper we go. And over time, we want to go very, very deep. But mindfulness, Satipaṭṭhāna, is practiced at any depth. We practice it when we're down there, we practice it when we're up here. We practice it in the hall when we're doing a long sitting and the mind is very quiet and we're very precise with the awareness. We practice it at home, when we're cooking, when we're cleaning, when we're watching TV. It's actually difficult to practice mindfulness watching TV. Have you tried? It's easier to do it while cooking. But Satipaṭṭhāna is meant to be a complete way of life. It's not restricted to a meditation technique. It's bigger than that. It was always meant to be bigger than that. where you have these 4 Satipaṭṭhānas which cover everything, all aspects of experience. And we'll go through those later in the retreat. Then the Buddha says, what are the 4? Here a bhikkhu, let's say, we'll translate this as practitioner because that's what it means. Here a practitioner surrendering longing and dejection regarding the world, lives contemplating body as body, ardent, clearly understanding and mindful. Surrendering longing and dejection regarding the world, he lives contemplating feeling as feeling, ardent, clearly understanding and mindful. Surrendering longing and dejection for the world, he lives contemplating mind as mind, he lives contemplating phenomena as phenomena, ardent, clearly understanding and mindful. So here you have the same sentence for each of the 4 Satipaṭṭhānas. So we'll just go through the first one because it's the same with all of them. First of all, you have the practitioner surrendering longing and dejection, or desire and grief regarding the world, lives contemplating body as body, ardent, clearly understanding and mindful. So here, the basic activity is to contemplate or to track. Now, contemplating body as body, contemplating is the standard translation, although it's not very good. These days I prefer to translate it as tracking. The word is anupassana. Passana means seeing, so to see something. Now, when you see something, when does it happen? It happens now. Seeing has an immediacy about it. I'm seeing right now. And it's direct. Boom. I'm seeing this. I'm seeing this. I'm seeing this. Right now. Boom. The prefix anu means along. So it's seeing along. Seeing continuously. I see something right now, and then I follow it. I don't just see it once and forget it. I see it and then track it and follow it. This is anupassana. I think it's actually better to translate it as tracking rather than the usual contemplating. Contemplating sounds like you're thinking about it, but tracking is much more, I think, much more real. Sometimes I give the example of an Australian movie that was made some years ago called The Tracker. It was set in Western Australia in the desert in the 1920s, and in the story you have 2 white mounted policemen. Mounted means they're on horses, and they're chasing an Aboriginal man who has been accused of a murder. Falsely, as it turns out, but because he's Aboriginal, it's easy to accuse him. And to find him, they have an Aboriginal tracker to track this man through the desert, because the man is going back to his tribe in the desert. The tracker is following the path through this wilderness. And at one point in the movie, they come to a place where in front of them is what's called a gibba. A gibba is a desert that doesn't have sand, it has little pebbles, rocks. It's a rock pebble desert. And you could see this extent of the gibba and then a ridge in the front. And the tracker stands at the edge and he's looking at it, and he said, he came this way about an hour ago, he went here, he went over there, and then he crossed the ridge there. And one of the policemen, the young one, is very sceptical about this tracker. He doesn't trust it. And he says, that's ridiculous. No one could possibly tell that from looking at these rocks. And the older policeman says, get off your horse and stand with the tracker. He'll explain it to you. So the young white man is standing there. And the tracker says, do you see that rock? And the policeman says, what rock? There is millions of rocks. And the tracker says, that one. And he points down, and the camera pans down, and it zeroes onto the ground, and there's this little rock about this size, and it's being disturbed, like that. And the soil underneath it is just a little bit damper than the soil around it. And the policeman says, "Oh yes." And the tracker says, "Do you see that rock? And that's been disturbed just a little bit. Do you see that one there? That one there? That one there?" And suddenly this path appears. This is tracking. Following a path, at first, impossible. But when you start to look at it, oh yes, something has happened, and then there's something else that's connected to it. And then there's something else over here, and you start to follow it. This is the activity of Satipaṭṭhāna. This is the fundamental activity that we're doing in this meditation practice. We are trackers. And what we are tracking is our own experience. How our experience unfolds during the day. In theory, we would not have to come into the meditation hall and spend hours of sitting and slow walking. We could still do the tracking. But we would be doing it at a surface level. The sitting and the walking gives us samadhi, and that helps us do the tracking at a deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper level. That's why it's important. The more samadhi we develop, the better it is, because it gives us the depth. But we're not here to develop samadhi. We're here to track the nature of experience and how it moves and what it does over a period of time. And those times of the day when we have absolutely no samadhi are just as valuable as those times of the day where we have very deep samadhi. And one of the things we're tracking is, when I have deep concentration, it's like this. When I don't have deep concentration, it's like that. And I'm tracking. This is what happens. Sometimes I'm very calm, and then someone does something and I get really angry. Where did that come from? I was so spiritual just a moment ago. I was radiating metta to all beings, and then suddenly I want to kill this person. And then later on, then suddenly I think, oh, that's ridiculous. And I'm not angry anymore. That's odd. That's interesting. We're tracking experience. And it doesn't have to be any special experience, but what we need to do is to track it. But in order to track it, we have to remember it. If I keep forgetting, I can't track. Mindfulness is all about following something through. The example that I like to give is, let's say you live in KL, which I understand is a big city. And let's say you join a particular group, right, that meets once a week in a part of the city that you are not familiar with. Maybe you've never been there before. And you're not at all sure how to get to this meeting place. But fortunately, a friend of yours is a member, and your friend rings you up and says, look, I'll drive you there, because I'm going too. So don't worry about it. So you think, phew, that's a relief. On the night that the first meeting, first time you go, your friend comes to the house, you get in the car, you sit in the front passenger seat, off you go. Your friend drives you through KL, through parts of the city that you've never been before. You arrive at the meeting place. As you drive through the city, you're sitting in the front of the car, you're looking around. Are you aware? Yes. Let's say your friend pulls up at your house, you get in the car, and your friend says, look, I can drive you tonight, but I'm not coming next week, so you're going to have to drive yourself. And you say, okay, and off you go. Would there be a difference in the quality of your awareness under these circumstances compared to if you were confident that your friend was going to drive you next week? Would there be any difference in the quality of your awareness? Yes. And what would be the difference? You'd be tracking your way through the city. You wouldn't just be watching the landscape go by. You'd be working at it. Okay, we went south for some time. Then we came to such a road. There was the sign to PJ, and we took that exit. And then we went up until we came to that big construction site, and then we turned right. You'd be mapping your journey as you went along so that you could reproduce it the next time. This is mindfulness. It's remembering as we go. And this is one reason why mindfulness is associated with wisdom. It's not just being aware. It's not good enough to just be aware. What we have to do is to track, to follow our experience, to see that it unfolds and to discover how it unfolds. To see that one thing follows another, and then gradually to understand how one thing follows another. Now, we've been talking about this in a very basic way with distraction. First, I notice that I get distracted. It sounds pretty obvious, doesn't it? But it's amazing how people don't pay attention to their distractions. Although it's often the dominant experience, but we don't pay attention. First of all, I notice I am distracted. Then I start to study the distraction. How does it work? What is distraction? Now I see it starts with forgetting. Something makes me forget. And then later on, I remember. So I start to get interested in how is it that I forget? What makes me forget? What are the sorts of things that cause me to forget? When I remember, where am I when I remember? Where have I come to? And how did I get to here from there? And where am I headed next? So we start to get interested in this. We start to follow our experience. Now, when we're doing a formal meditation, let's say I'm following the breathing, I'm doing that just with the breathing. In, out. Whoops, forgot. Come back. That's interesting. How did I forget? For example, sometimes I might notice that as the breathing gets more peaceful, my mind gets more dull. Does that ever happen? Is that a familiar experience? So I think, oh, that's interesting. Then I might recollect, when I go to bed at night, what do? Well, I lie down, close my eyes, relax and breathe. Maybe when I'm meditating, I'm breathing myself to sleep. So maybe I need to pay attention to that. If the breathing is getting more peaceful and my mind is getting dull, do I tend to get dull on the inhalation or the exhalation? Which one? That's an important question. And if I don't know the answer, then why not? Aren't I paying attention? Aren't I interested? Where is the breath? We're going to do some exercises tomorrow morning on tracking breathing, just to toss in a few ideas about how it can be done. But you can see that the first thing we have to do is not take anything for granted. Often one of the reasons that people have difficulty with breathing meditation is because they think they know how they breathe. So they don't really pay attention. Our breathing is boring. Sometimes if I talk to a meditator in interview, what's your primary object? Oh, the breathing. And what's your experience of the breathing? Oh, it's always the same. As soon as they say that, I know they're not paying attention. It's obvious. The other giveaway is, oh, it's really boring. They're not paying attention. If we pay attention to anything, it becomes interesting. Think of people who collect stamps. Anything can be interesting if there's a quality of attention, if we're really following it. It's really very important that we don't take anything for granted, but learn to be interested in the detail of the experience when we're sitting here doing a formal meditation practice, but equally be interested when we're out there, cruising around. I'm walking down the steps to breakfast, and I'm looking out at the view. It's beautiful. 2 steps later, I realise I've completely forgotten the view and I'm caught up in a fantasy. Isn't that interesting? How did that happen? What is attractive about that fantasy? Why is that fantasy more interesting to me than that view? What's going on? So it's learning to be interested, to be curious in how experience unfolds. And it doesn't matter what the experience is. Because Satipaṭṭhāna has this quality of covering everything. Satipaṭṭhāna is not a meditation technique. It's everything. But the basic action of it is to follow, to track. This becomes that, and then it goes there, and then it does this, and then it does this other thing, and that's where it goes. And I'm following along after it. So this is our fundamental practice, and this is the essence of Satipaṭṭhāna. But we'll talk more about it tomorrow night.